Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings.
International News Review.
And we're back with the International News Review with Steve Okun. As always, Steve, a very, very busy week. And you want to kick off with a story, I think, that affects everybody. This week, a French scientist was denied entry into the United States, apparently because the scientist had expressed a personal opinion on the Trump administration's research policy. Why has this become such a big story? Why is it relevant to us?
Well, people, and when I say people, a few people are now actually asking here in Singapore, I'm not an American. I'm going to go to the U.S. I have taken positions that are against either President Trump directly or certainly against the policies of President Trump. Could I be denied entry into the United States for that reason alone? And so the message that's going on now is that has the U.S. changed? Is now the U.S. going to be the thought police in terms of who's allowed in or not? The U.S. government has said that's not the case on day 2 or day 3, but it is still causing great concern in Singapore, and I'm sure elsewhere, about do you have the right to speak out against the United States if you're not a U.S. citizen?
And just to clarify again, this man was not a politician. He does not work in geopolitics, as I understand. He was a French scientist, and all he'd done, he'd made some comments online that were critical of the Trump administration. And here's the part I wanted to ask you. A spokesperson for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection said, and I quote, "On rare occasions, an officer may search a traveler's mobile phone, computer camera, or other electronic devices during the inspection process." Well, first, are you aware of this? Because I can see why, the obvious terror threat, why you might do that. But what are the legal grounds for checking a traveler's phone beyond a terror threat?
Oh, no, that's simple. If you are a non-U.S. citizen, you do not have the rights of an American. And if you're coming to the United States, you are subject to search. None of that is new. The question here is, well, one, was this person intentionally searched or was he searched randomly? So we kind of don't know that. Now, this French scientist has criticisms of the Trump administration, and they were then found on his phone. It was his personal opinion on the Trump administration's research policy, which, of course, it is attacking research, and it's certainly at least attacking the funding for research. It's attacking certain types of research. And then this person was not allowed into the United States. They were denied entry. Now, the French minister that then came out very strongly. So the Minister of Higher Education and Research for France said that he learned this person was being denied entry. It was because of these exchanges with colleagues and friends on the personal opinion against the Trump administration. And then the French minister says, freedom of opinion, free research, and academic freedom are values that we uphold, and we defend the right of all French researchers to be faithful to them. So that's where we had ended the day one story. The day one story is that somebody who comes to the U.S. opposing the Trump administration is denied entry. And if that's true, that will certainly be a concern to anyone who has taken a position publicly against the Trump administration. Now, the day two story is that afterwards, the Department of Homeland Security says that's not why he was denied entry. He was denied entry because he had, quote unquote, confidential data from Los Alamos National Laboratory, and that he was a scientist. He had an NDA. He had the right to this data. He didn't have the right to it on his phone. We found it on his phone. We expelled him. And so it had nothing to do with his personal opinions. It had to do with this. I think that's a little bit convenient, but it could be true. We just don't know.
I mean, a serious question out of this. In your entire career spent working either with or alongside the U.S. government, have you ever come across this before? This kind of, well, I'm not going to use the word. You can use whatever word you like to describe it. And should Singaporeans listening to this, or Singapore residents who may have been critical of the Trump administration on their social media feeds, in their WhatsApp groups, should they be concerned if they go to a U.S. airport?
I mean, my answer is no, you shouldn't be concerned. But then I'm like, am I certain that you shouldn't be concerned. I got approached. I was at an event last night. A professor, I'm not going to go further than that, came up to me, said he has published I'll go in the broad space of ESG, and that what he is published.
Singaporean.
No, non-Singaporean, but a foreigner, not an American.
Yep.
And he's published in the broader area of ESG, and the policies that he has written about have been attacked by the Trump administration as being woke and et cetera. And he said, should I be concerned? I'm like, I really don't think you should be, but how can you say definitively no, unless the Trump administration is going to come out and definitively say, you are fine to criticize the Trump administration, the U.S. government, U.S. policy. You're still welcome in the United States. Now, if it's terrorism and promoting terrorism, that is very different. But if we're talking about political opinion, about research, about ESG or sustainability, the Trump administration should make very clear that everybody's still welcome to the United States, so long as you follow our laws and you are not advocating for terrorism or criminal. And this person clearly wasn't. What he had talked about had nothing to do with anything like that. This was about research.
It is unusual times, let's be honest. All right, moving slightly ahead. Reciprocal Tariff Day is coming on April the 2nd. This week, the US President Donald Trump insisted that new reciprocal tariff rates will take effect on April the 2nd. First, Steve, and you've probably been asked this question 100 times this week, what are reciprocal tariff rates? Let's start with that.
Well, just one slight question. It is no longer Reciprocal Tariff Day.
I apologize.
It's Liberation Day.
Oh, of course it is.
President Trump has declared this to be Liberation Day. Look, on its simple form, it's kind of, you kind of think of it, well, the President Trump is saying if we have a tariff of 3% on a good, to come into the U.S. And if the U.S. sends a country a tariff, that same good, but they charge 8% or 10%, that's not fair. Therefore, everything should be reciprocal. Well, that's not how we've ever done trade. You've always looked at trade to say what is in the best interest of the United States, and we're going to set our tariffs and trade policy that way because this is what's in our interest, and whatever you do, if we can take action against you if we want, but to just have a blanket reciprocal tariff, one, is going to be almost impossible to do, and it is going to be against the U.S. interest. One short example of this is that the United States has said we will allow small packages to come into the United States without formal entry if the value is under $800 because that is going to be best for small business. It's going to be best for delivery. It's going to be best for customs. Very few countries, basically none, have an $800 limit. Some of them, it could be $50, could be $100, could be $25, because their countries are different. And now you're going to have to match every single one. It is going to cause massive confusion in just this one example and hurt U.S. businesses when this happens. So this simple idea of, well, it's all fair, it really isn't fair. It's not in the U.S. interest, and it is going to wreak havoc. Now, it appears that because the government has realized, the Trump administration has realized, this isn't so simple, it's not in the U.S. interest, we may not really have a full reciprocal tariff day on Liberation Day.
Okay, let's see it from both sides. This will be difficult for you, but put yourself in Donald Trump's head for a moment. See it from his point of view. Why? Why is he doing this? What does he see as the potential upside?
Well, again, he sees one thing is that his favorite word in the dictionary is tariffs. Mm-hmm. That's not my favorite word in the dictionary. There are times the U.S. should be using tariffs on very specific either countries or sectors, and then it can make sense. And if the United States says China is dumping too much steel and aluminum into the United States, and it is unfair because of the state subsidies China is using, and it is hurting our domestic in our domestic steel and aluminum industry, then by all means put tariffs on Chinese aluminum steel. Then it makes perfect sense. And so there are times when you do use tariffs, but to say we're going to have reciprocal tariffs on everybody, everywhere, full stop, that is not good economic policy. It's not good trade policy. It is going to be inflationary. The consumers are the ones who are going to be paying for this, nobody else, and it just isn't going to work, and it's why we will see how much the Trump administration walks back from this promise, and I think they're going to walk back from it somewhere between moderately to significantly.
And for Singapore businesses listening to this, CEOs, C-suite leaders, that kind of thing, we're less than 2 weeks away from the deadline, and the plans are still being finalized. Are we expecting chaos on Liberation Day? I mean, how can Singapore businesses, if at all, prepare for this?
Okay, they can't, right? Nobody can because nobody knows what the rules are. And this is where Singapore is not out of the woods on reciprocal tariff day, because what President Trump is saying is that when he is going to judge the trade relationship between any country, right? And we will use Singapore in particular as an example, but this applies to everyone. He is not just looking at the tariffs rate to see what is reciprocal. He says, well, Singapore has a VAT. Right, a value-added tax. That value-added tax is what's getting passed on to the U.S. manufacturers who are shipping to Singapore. Therefore, we are going to take that into account. Well, Singapore's VAT, I think, is 9%. I can't remember exactly. Yeah. Well, that means tariffs are going to go up 9%. So we've got to look at VAT. We got to look at, is Singapore a currency manipulator? And it's not whether Singapore is a currency manipulator from Singapore's perspective or anybody else's perspective, only the U.S. government's perspective. And maybe the U.S. government will find that Singapore is a currency manipulator. Maybe the U.S. government will say Singapore engages in unfair trade practices because there are semiconductors flowing from the U.S. to Singapore, eventually onto China. We think that's the case, and that's unfair. And so Singapore could get tariffs, not. It used to be, we'll look at the tariff rate and see and then you can kind of judge it. Now you look at VAT. Now you look at currency. Now you look at transshipments. And you don't know how the Trump administration is going to apply those. And it can apply those to Singapore differently than to Vietnam, than to Malaysia, than to Thailand. And so when you ask me the question, how do you prepare for Liberation Day, reciprocal tariff day, I say, how should I know? How should anybody know?
Well, that was the vibe I got. I went to an excellent panel talk that Steve organized this week at the 1880 Club. Deborah Elms was there, who was on our show. She's a tariffs economics expert. We had banking bosses. We had geopolitical analysts. And honestly, Steve, I felt an air of despondency. I didn't hear any positivity at all. Are there any positives Singapore listeners could take from, quotes, Liberation Day?
Not until we see what happens. And part of what's going on right now, and I've got an article with Thurgood Marshall Jr. coming out next week, we hope, if we can ever write it, because we have to rewrite it every day, is what is it that countries should be doing? How are governments acting to this? And what you see happening now is all these governments going to Washington trying to appease the Trump administration, saying, don't tariff us, we should get an exemption. So the Australians are doing it, the Vietnamese are doing it, the Japanese are doing it, the Koreans are doing it. You know, the Singapore government and trade officials were just there. And so will Singapore get an exemption because of, and as Donald Trump just said on Truth Social, the U.S.-Singapore relationship is vital? Who knows? Will Australia get an exemption? Australia has a trade deficit with the U.S., so the U.S. has a trade surplus with them. You've got very strong military ties with AUKUS that we've talked about on the show when it happened a long time ago. Will Australia get an exemption? Who knows? And what does it all mean? And then the other thing you always have to keep in mind to complicate everything, it's not just the Americans who are saying the Chinese are engaged in unfair trade practices. You've got the Europeans, the Canadians, the Thais, the Indonesians, even the Russians are putting tariffs on China because, as I said, China engages in unfair trade practices because they use the power of the state. They use state subsidies to defund their domestic industries. They have excess supply, and because they have excess supply that can't be sold in China, they dump it into other markets. And even the Russians say, we have to protect our domestic auto industry. industry against the Chinese. So not only do you have to try and watch what are the Americans doing, you have to ask yourself, what are the Chinese and other countries going to do in response? And then what are other countries doing to China? What's China doing to other countries? And so we have a global trade war. This is not a Trump trade war. This is not a U.S.-China trade war. This did not start with President Trump. It started long before that, and it is a mess.
Whew, I've got a headache now. All right, we don't know what's going to happen then, but we did know that this week, I do know, Singapore had a lot of rain, okay? It had a lot of rain, and I'm going to qualify this week. I walked past the Pasar Malam, a night market, on Thursday night, and this should have been its busiest week of the year. It's the Hari Raya season, and it was a washout. A washout, metaphorically and literally. Should have been one of their most profitable weeks. They made no money in the middle of the school holidays. This is the third monsoon surge of the year. It's not unheard of, but it is not typical. They're getting more and more frequent, Steve. Are we doing enough in business and elsewhere to address climate risk in Singapore? We're getting heavier rains, longer rains, more intense storms in Singapore.
Well, look, Singapore is better than anybody else in Southeast Asia when it comes to addressing climate risk. Because if you look at Indonesia and the Philippines and Thailand and Malaysia
even
as examples, they don't have the money to do the infrastructure that Singapore has to do to try and mitigate the risks from climate change. And so, yeah, I mean, you see all you see the drainage and all of the flood preparation that Singapore has undertaken very wisely. It has a smart government. It has a government with foresight. It has the money to do this, and the other governments don't. So the climate risk is hitting other governments and countries in Southeast Asia much harder than it's hitting Singapore. That said, you're not going to beat Mother Nature on climate risk. And as great as Singapore is, it is going to have to do even more. It's going to have to spend even more money because the climate crisis is going to worsen. The higher temperatures we get, the more intense storms there are going to be. Singapore is going to be exposed to storms that it hadn't been before, like everywhere else in the world. And so this is highlighting what's to come. I have full confidence that if any government can mitigate climate risk, it's Singapore, but it's not going to be able to mitigate it fully because no one can right now.
But what can they actually do? I mean, I was looking, a golf tournament was washed out. Sentosa beach outlets saw only 10% of their usual crowds. It's hitting pockets across the nation now in Singapore. I saw one or two incentives. A Western eatery, Southwest at Pongal, came up with this clever idea, a $20 return voucher for guests who visit when it's raining. Not a bad idea, but what else can SMEs and other companies realistically do?
There is only a line that you can do. There is only so far that creativity will take you. So what's going to happen? What's happening to ski resorts all over the world? What's happening to wineries where they're located in a place that the climate doesn't want a winery to be anymore, where it used to thrive? So some businesses are going to have to shut down. Others are going to have to spend the money to adapt. And so, some businesses that I've worked with and, wearing my ESG and responsible investment hat, you don't store things on a floor anymore in a store. You have to raise everything up because now the store is going to flood when it didn't flood in the past. So you have to take those precautions. When you are going to look to set up a new logistics hub or a new store, now you used to look, okay, do they have foot traffic or do they have access to roads? Do they have the right electricity that's needed? Now you have to say, do they have access to water? Because there's water drying up. Or are they going to be hit with too much water? So all planning is going to have to take effect. And so many businesses, and bravo to them, have been focused on climate in terms of reducing their emissions. It's all been, how can we reduce our emissions? Can we use more solar? Can we put, can we put panels on the warehouse roof to reduce our emissions? Can we make our supply chains more efficient so that we don't have as much carbon emissions in those? Reduction is fine. You have to focus on adaptation now. And look, some businesses are going to go out of business. You can only adapt so much. Singapore has been pretty insulated for any number of reasons, and it's going to be less and less insulated. And that's just the way we are right now.
Oh, indeed. All right. Speaking of impacted businesses, let's finish in Hollywood. When they came for the Democrats, we did nothing. When they came for the Senate, we did nothing. When they came for the judiciary, we did nothing. And now the MAGA crowd have come for Snow White. How did we get here, Steve? Give us an overview of what's happened to Snow White right now, because it is being hammered by the MAGA crowd in the US.
The New York Post alone has published 20 articles over the last week on, and one of the headlines, Grumpy, Dopey, and Woke. You know, they're not calling it Snow White, they're calling it Snow Woke.
Yeah.
And so if you were making the decision today, should we remake this 1937 movie that is called Snow White that includes 7 dwarfs, you'd probably say no. It's just, but in 2019, it was probably borderline, but they said we make so much money off of these live action movies that turn cartoons, obviously, to live action. Let's go with it. We understand that there's some sensitivities when it comes to a character who is white. We understand there's some sensitivities on characters who are dwarfs. So we'll be able to accommodate that. They weren't. They're just getting attacked from all sides. And then the actors aren't making it any better for them
I know,
either.
it's hilarious. So for context, the actor playing Snow White is a Latina, and they didn't cast any little people in the end. They did CGI characters and called them magical creatures, which has actually annoyed the little people community, saying it's deprived them of employment. Gal Gadot, who plays the evil queen, is very pro-Israel. And what's her name? Rachel Zegler, who plays Snow White, is very pro-Palestine. It's a nightmare, Steve. Have we reached the stage now where even Hollywood has to be very careful about the kinds of movies they release and the kind of publicity their actors give them? Well, I mean, first, you have to ask yourself, should we be remaking a movie from the standards in 1937, where we were culturally, what was acceptable or not in 1937 is not where we are today. And you see that, are you allowed to call somebody fat anymore, like Roald Dahl and all of the controversy there? And do you rewrite the books? So this isn't a new issue, but boy, could you have picked more hot button issues in one movie than this one? And then, as you mentioned, when you've got the stars who are coming out and say, when they're promoting the movie, they then share the trailer on X and add, and always remember, free Palestine. Yeah, don't talk about Palestine. Don't talk about Israel. Just talk about magical creatures in the woodland. That's your job. That's what you're being paid for. And so you've got everything going, very difficult with this. It's, from what you see, it's, at least the reviews are saying, it seems to be an okay movie. I've seen it. It's okay. It's okay, and it won't make the money that they made in previous live action. But you have to have a geopolitical mindset on everything now. And movies are getting caught in the culture wars. Movies are getting caught between the U.S. and China. We've talked about this in the Barbie movie in terms of what maps are included, and is that going to offend the Chinese? And then now, if you're self-censoring on the Chinese, is that going to hurt you in the U.S. When you've got both sides looking at DEI and can you attack anything? It is going to lead to self-censorship for sure. It almost already certainly is. And this one is going to be the last. It's got to be one of the last movies from the 30s with this type of story that's going to be remade. Well, for heaven's sake, don't try to make Gone with the Wind, because that's just a racial minefield right there. All right, if you had to pick a dwarf for yourself to finish, which one are you? I'll pick Dopey for myself, because I know you'll say it anyway. No, I would have picked Dopey for you either way. Thank you. Well, my daughter just shouted out Grumpy, so I'm Grumpy and Dopey. Which one are you? Well, boy, I think they're going to have to make up a new one. I'm not happy.
Not now, anyway.
No.
I'm not Doc. What do I have to do with Doc?
You're a natural leader, Steve, and the way you sloughed out the new ambassador to Singapore, that was pretty Doc-like.
No, that would be. So maybe we'll get detective. Maybe we'll get Sherlock. Will be the eighth. I'll be the eighth dwarf. No jokes about my height. Okay?
No.
None whatsoever.
No.
No, not allowed. For those who want to see me on LinkedIn, you will see a photo where I am dwarfed by the Humphreys family, where Neil and Abby Rose tower over me.
That's why he's paid the big bucks, folks. Detective Steve Okun, thank you very much.
Thank you, and we even went 2 minutes longer than Neil said we were going to.
Cheers, Steve.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.